Welcome everyone to FIAL's presentation on Reinvigorating Business. My name is Gary Saliba, and with my webinar co-host, Marvin Oka, we will, over the next 90 minutes, take you on a journey of exploring some critical questions on reinvigorating business in a transition economy. By way of introduction, I have been working in this area for the last 26 years. My interests and area of expertise lie in helping people respond to and enhance their capability to complexity and uncertainty. Now, I have a range of tools and mechanisms that enable me to do this, including systems thinking, foresight, using scenario planning methodology, complex adaptive systems, strategic conversations, and strategic thinking. I also help people through leadership development programs and assisting them to go through these programs to enhance their sense of self and their sense of identity as leaders in dealing with complex situations. I now ask Marvin, my colleague, to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marvin Oka. Gary and I have been working together since probably the early 90s, so we know each other quite well, and we have very complementary skill sets and approaches to working with transformational change. My particular work is in the area of what's known as neuro-behavioural modeling. What I essentially do is I look at forms of human ability, and my job is to find out ways in which we can replicate or transfer talent and skills. And I'm particularly interested in areas around complex thinking, complex decision-making, and whole system change. And it's very, very relevant, and obviously in this current business environment where we are trying to now transition out of the lockdown periods of the COVID-19. And as we transition back into an emerging new economy, what does that look like? And it requires new ways of thinking, new ways of making very complex decisions as things around us are continually changing. I've worked on different types of methodologies, working with things ranging from strategic thinking to inner work, to being able to find new ways to actually work within yourself so that you can actually see your world very differently. And worked with many clients from international as well as from corporate and government as well. But let's get into this. We've got a lot to cover. Gary and I are very excited about what we have for you in the next hour and a half. And we've got a lot to cover, so we're going to cut straight to it. But first, a couple of housekeeping rules. So I'll hand back to Gary to cover those.
Thanks, Marvin. So in terms of housekeeping, as we've said, the webinar will be approximately 90 minutes long. And during that time, we'll be presenting you with a range of different of information. And we'll be asking you to participate with us on this journey. And so there'll be times where we ask you questions, and we'd like you to respond through the chat function. Clearly, throughout the webinar, we'll be saying things that will raise questions for you. We'd like you also to use the chat function to note those questions, and wherever we can, we'll try and answer those questions throughout the webinar, but mostly we'll leave them till the end, where we'll have a question and answer session and explore those the answers to those questions at that time. There are 5 key objectives we'd like to explore with you to help you and support you reinvigorate business. The first is to understand that there are a range of forces out there in the business landscape working away to create an adaptive nature, adaptive characteristics of the business landscape in a transition kind of economy. And to reinvigorate business, we need to realize that our leadership styles have to change. We need an adaptive leadership style to be able to operate in such a landscape. And we'll explore with you what it means for you and your business to take on such a leadership style. We also need to consider 3 key lenses of adaptiveness, relevance, and viability in a transition economy that will help you reinvigorate your business. And with those 3 lenses, consider a 5-step process to help you assess the future readiness of your business. And then finally, as a takeaway, and we'll explore this in detail, we offer you some strategic focus questions to help you rethink your business in this new business environment so that you can continue the conversation beyond this webinar to deepen your understanding and your capability to respond in a transition economy.
Now, we have a very structured way in which we want to facilitate the conversations throughout this particular webinar. And it starts with understanding a lot of where we are currently today. Now, just before, a couple of months ago, just before the COVID-19 lockdowns, most people were coming from a framework just saying, look, it's business as usual. It's BAU. Everybody just keep doing what you need to do. Then along comes COVID-19. And what a wild disruption that is. And it continues on today, and it won't stop for a very long time. It was not just an inconvenience, but around the world, it was a disruption. Things just stopped. BAU, business as usual, wasn't usual anymore. As people have said, it was the new normal. Now, that's an interesting term, which we will explore a lot more as we go throughout this particular webinar. But now that it's stopped, now that the business as usual had stopped, and we're now starting to say, well, great, how do we now come out of this lockdown? What does this emerging new economy looks like as government starts to now lift its restrictions and its lockdown restrictions? It's a surprise. Now, I don't know if anyone's been watching MasterChef recently, but if you have, it's like when you lift up the mystery box or when you lift up the cloche, and it's like, what's underneath? And it's very similar where people are thinking, well, as we start to lift the restrictions, what does the new transitional economy look like? Is it business as usual? Is it we're going to go back to the way it was before? Or is it a quote unquote new normal? Or is it something that is altogether different? It's not just a new normal. It might be a new not normal. Everything's quite different at this point. These are interesting questions to ask. Now, in order to address that, people are asking, what do I do now? But in order to address that, you first have to understand, where are we right now? Before we decide what do I do now as a business, how do I reinvigorate my business now, we need to understand what's going on around us. And that has a lot to do with how you see it. That how you define what's going on around us right now can be multiple interpretations. And some of these ways of seeing your world and its impact on your business as the restrictions get lifted, how you see it completely determines what the effectiveness of your response from here. So, Gary, over to you, and let's kind of find out from our audience here what their view is at the moment.
Thanks, Marvin. We'd be interesting to hear from you what you think the kind of disruption we're experiencing. It can range anywhere from significant but temporary to significant with many potential changes, and that could be at a local, regional, or national and international level, and significant with many permanent changes. So it very much reflects what Marvin's been saying. Your perceptions are going to be important in how you make sense of this situation and the emerging economy that evolves. So just fairly quickly in the chat function, we'd like to get some sense from you what you think where we are on this scale. So I'll just give you a moment to answer that. And already I can see from participants, we're fairly heavily on the right-hand side, significant with many permanent changes. So ranging from 7, the lowest I've seen so far is 7. This is very interesting. So it's clear that you're looking more towards the right-hand side, significant with many permanent changes. So this is really interesting because it has profound implications on how we now perceive the world, how we think about it, and how we want to move forward.
Now, these changes that we're starting to experience in the world, where it's significant with many permanent changes, as Gary said, as many of you are now saying, it's more towards the right-hand side. Interestingly enough, while the economy is changing considerably, the impact on your business depends. So let's take a look a bit more about your thoughts around what's going to happen. It's significant, yes. So when the restrictions are locked down, what happens now? Are we pretty much going back to normal? Is it going to be a new normal, or is it going to be a dramatically new world? So it's kind of an extension of the question we just asked, but now we just kind of maybe need to hone it down to something a little bit more simple in terms of what's going to happen. Is your mindset, how do we get back to normal? oh no, it'll be a new normal, we're going to have to figure that out, or oh, it's a brave new world. It's not just a new normal, it's a dramatically new world. So into the chat function, if you will, please, if you can just jot down numbers 1, 2, or 3, which one you think it is. So Gary, let us know when we've got something, and tell us what the averages are.
Interesting. Lots of 2s, some 2.5s. Actually a 1.5.
Okay.
Just to be different, that's very interesting. Lots of 2s. I think the average is coming out to be very much 2. My eyeball, 2, 2, 2, 2. Yes, lots of 2s. So the new normal seems to be a key theme that's coming out from participants. Thank you all. The question is, what does that new normal mean to you? That's the question we want to ask.
That's a very big one. So yes, well, we're kind of glad that no one has really settled on 1. That's a good one, because that's going to be incredibly unlikely. And it is true, it's probably not going to be an extreme number 3 either. It will be 2, but as Gary has pointed out, well, what does 2 mean? What does a new normal actually mean? It's not a standardized thing. So we're going to explore that considerably. Now, as the cloche gets lifted, as the new economy is starting to unfold, new transition economy is emerging, how do we make sense of it? New normal means what? Does it mean my business somewhat stays the same but slightly different? Does it mean it's very different? Does it mean it's pretty much mostly the same? Now, whenever there's forms of confusion like this, or questions that are difficult to answer, one of the things we do know in the behavioral modeling world is we look for something called stable datum, which means what can we stabilize as information, as data, that we can stabilize and say, we know this for certain. And then that way we can start building upon our perceptions and our perspective as to what's going on. So what do we know, particularly right now? Now, we're about to ask you a range of questions, and we're going to go through these quickly because we kind of want a somewhat general response for all of this. These questions are all kind of related to each other in different ways, and you'll see how this is structured in just a moment. So the first question is, and it's rhetorical here, we don't need you to answer in the chat form just yet. So just think about it in your own mind. As you go through this sequence of questions that's meant to actually outline a line of thinking. So do we believe that this will be the last of the pandemics we'll ever see in our lifetime? Is this the only major crisis really facing the planet and humankind? Do we think that there will be no other disruptions on this kind of a scale ever again? Do you think that, let's say all the restrictions got lifted right away, would we go straight back to the way it was before COVID-19? Do we think, oh great, things will just kind of stabilize and business will pick up again and everything will go back to the way that it was? Even under this new normal, do we think it's going to be relatively kind of like what it was before COVID-19? And even if Australia lifted all of its restrictions right now, do we actually think if our supply chains are also dependent on countries like China, or we export to New Zealand, to the US perhaps, or to Southeast Asia, do we actually think that all the economies around the world are all going to stabilize in the same way, at the same rate, at the same time? Or is it going to be in flux? Is the system going to be moving in different ways? And speaking of the system, how many other variables are there do we have to adjust for in the way we think about reinvigorating our business? Do we think that levels of unemployment will have impacts on our supply and demand chains, or on our value chains? Do we think the fact that some businesses are now closed, or many businesses are now closed, will make a difference? Do we think that the interest rates and the pressure to keep them down is going to make a difference as to our exports, imports? Do we think interrupted supply chains will make a difference? Do we think depression rates? Do we think unemployment rates? Do we think domestic violence rates? Do we think crime? Do we think all of these increased social issues that will occur in our society is going to make any difference to our particular business, in our larger business landscape? And what about the government budget deficits? We're funding up JobKeeper, we're funding up JobSeeker, we're funding up a whole range of things. Do we think government just happens to have this $500 billion sitting in the back and where they can just whip it out? Or Or are we going to have to pay for this in some particular way? Will costs go up? Will GST go up? While no one's got a crystal ball, do we think any of this has the potential to impact how we think business works when restrictions get lifted? And ultimately, do we actually honestly believe our economy will be stable in the short, medium, and even long term? Do we think it actually stabilizes in any real way? Now, these questions are actually structured in a particular way. The first set is around continuity and disruption. Your thoughts around how do you understand your world right now in terms of continuity and disruption? The next couple are looking at how do you understand it in terms of what will be stable and not stable? The next is around how simple or complex do you think our business landscape is? And the last has to do with in what time horizons are we particularly looking at? So Gary, any comments you have?
Yes. When we look at these four critical frames of reference, we can think about these as contributing and interrelating with each other, and depending on how far you go from one extreme to the other, to defining the transition economy. An economy that is constantly changing, that's adaptive, and at the same time a transition from the old economy that we knew to an economy that is emerging and that may never really stabilize. We may see an economy that will constantly change according to these particular variables and a range of other variables. So when Marvin and I set this up, it was quite an interesting property to emerge from the conversations and these questions that Marvin framed to starting to define what a transition, the characteristics of what a transition economy could look like and what could contribute to it. And so as we go into the future in understanding the nature of the business landscape, we need to look at how these particular variables are shifting from one side to the other.
Yeah, as Gary's pointed out, to answer that question, where are we? What business situation are we in? We need to recognize we are in a global economy that is continually adjusting, and it is a transition economy, and it will probably be that way for a while. This is a world of an adaptive world, a world that requires us to be able to adapt and evolve our thinking about how we do business, what effective business actually looks like. Now, as we've just also pointed out, not all businesses are impacted to the same degree and in the same way. And so we're going to need to sort that out, or you'll need to sort that out for yourself. And we're going to give you some guidelines to be able to help you do that. And one of the key things is understanding the difference between what's called an adaptive challenge versus a technical challenge, and therefore its implications for being an adaptive leader or a technical leader. And so we'll explore this a bit further in terms of what these kinds of things actually mean. So Gary, care to explain the difference between technical and adaptive?
Yes, certainly. Technical problems and challenges are those that have a set, when we look at them, we can see a way forward, putting enough effort, research, money and time and expertise, we can understand what a technical problem, issue and challenge looks like. We can come up with solutions by doing enough research and enough consultation. The way forward can be determined. And we can then come up with a roadmap that will solve the problem and deal with the challenge. And the technical problems and challenges are points in time. Adaptive challenges, on the other hand, are multi-issued. No matter how much research, no matter how much money we put into and effort into an adaptive challenge, we may never understand truly how it operates because of the systemic nature of the challenge. And by that I mean there are many, many different forces that are working and adapting and responding to each other as change happens to that challenge. And so it's like a moving feast. It's like something that as you make one change now, you'll see the system respond, but you can never determine what the response will be prior to seeing it happening. And there's a technical word we use for that, and that's called emergent. So when changes happen in an adaptive system or an adaptive problem, we won't know what will happen or what it would look like until it actually happens. So there are no technical fixes or solutions that can be applied to adaptive challenges. And a lot of the ways of managing, dealing with adaptive challenges is actually managing them. There's a desire by human beings to solve problems. And that's great if you have a technical one, but adaptive challenges aren't of that nature. And as the world unfolds into a transition economy, not knowing what the rules are, the world is very much of an adaptive nature and has adaptive characteristics to it. And so moving forward will be based on more experimentation and coming up with short, low cost, low budget, willingness to fail and learn kinds of experiments to understand the nature and the characteristics of the adaptive challenge. And that's a very different way of thinking and operating. And this is where adaptive leadership needs to come in, because it requires a whole new sense of self-concept and self-image as a leader to deal with these kinds of challenges.
Yeah, this is such a critical distinction. This was made by Ronald Heifetz over at the Harvard Business School. And he pointed out that, as Gary has also said, that when people see a technical challenge, or they see something as a technical challenge, and technical leadership comes to the rise, they think that they can identify the problem, analyze it, come up with a solution, an expert solution, and it's about implementation. Now, where it applies to all of us in this particular webinar is that if any of us are thinking about our business and saying, in order to answer the question, what do I do now? If you're thinking, I wish I could have the steps. What are the 7 steps to success? Or what is the formula of what I need to follow from here? You're asking for a technical solution. As we've pointed out, though, we are in a transition economy. It's an adaptive challenge, and it requires an adaptive response. It requires adaptive leadership of how to lead your business into this new normal. And as a result, your whole approach is going to be very different. If you take a technical approach to an adaptive challenge, it will fail. It will get neutralized. So how do we do this? And as Gary's already outlined some things, and we're going to get down to some of the details behind how to actually make that work. So there's 3 keys in order to do an adaptive response. In looking at reinvigorating your business in a transition economy, you want 3 lenses to look at. You want to look at your business in terms of adaptiveness. Is it geared for not only changing, but for ongoing change? Is your business leadership one of adaptive responses rather than technical fixes? You need to understand that also as the environment is changing, the different dynamics in your business landscape is impacting your customers. And therefore, what they are now constituting as value, what constitutes for them as value add. Your business needs to add value. Is your business adding that value or not? And if it's not, it's irrelevant to them. Your business is irrelevant. Your offers are irrelevant. How do you establish relevance in a changing economy? Business relevance is based on, are you adding value to what I need as your customer? Are you adding value to me in what I need now as my conditions change as your customer? And then we need to do this in a way that is obviously economically viable, which means, how do we do this if we don't have long periods of time to come up with new products or services, or we have, it'll take us a while to change over our methods of operation? You're going to be non-viable. You're not going to last. The environment is changing. We're in a transition economy. The impact on your customers is dynamic. They're asking for new value propositions on an ongoing basis, and you've got to deliver it in ways that are quick to learn. Not, as Gary's already pointed out, it's not necessarily coming out with the perfect type of an offer, but it's one that works for now, and we improve it rapidly. So we're going to explore these 3 lenses in a much deeper way, and we're going to do it through a particular process, a 5-step process. But once again, adaptiveness is about how do you rethink your assumptions about how your business works. What is value? What is your business actually offering out there in a transition economy? And what's your business model? How do you think it works? How do you continue to add value in a changing world to stay relevant? And how do you do it in a way that's commercially viable and sustainable? In working with those three keys, we're going to give you a bit of a playbook. And this is pretty much now the heart of the webinar that Gary and I want to get into. It's a playbook of strategic focus questions. Now, we're going to pose it to you in this webinar so that you start thinking about this for yourself. If in your business, you also have a management team or a leadership team, or at least other key stakeholders that you interact with, and they're not on this webinar, by all means, take these focus questions back with you. We will be giving you a PDF that you can download of all of these questions and some of the key slides in this webinar. So you can take it back to your business environment, your particular workplace, and have these conversations at a much deeper level. But for right now, we do want to give you an initial playbook to start asking some key questions that get you thinking differently to reinvigorate your business. And it goes around this particular cycle. At the heart of it are those three lenses, and we've got a five-phased process for which to do it, of which we've got questions underneath each. So, Gary, you want to tell people a little bit about the process?
Yeah, there are five process steps, as Marvin has stated. The first is around perceiving. It's about looking at the world and getting a sense of what's happening there and making sense of that and saying to myself, what are the factors? What are the customers doing? What are the clients doing? What's changing in their lives? What does that mean for what they want from me as a business? And then drawing some distinctions about how the business landscape is changing from an economic perspective, from a customer perspective, from a logistics and supply chain perspective, and a range of other viewpoints that you need to consider in understanding the changing landscape. So this is about standing up, putting your head up and looking out and seeing what's happening and what's changing. And when you do that, you need to then say, what does this mean for me? How do I need to evaluate now my business based on the changing world that's happening out there and the conclusions that I am drawing? What's important here, and Marvin will talk about this shortly, is that in the perceiving and evaluating stage, we need to be aware of how we are telling ourselves the stories about the external world, because these are the filters we look through in how we perceive and how we evaluate. If the stories that we hold in our minds about the external world are narrow, our perceptions are going to be narrow and we're not going to see so much. But if the stories are rich and broad, then our perceptions will enable our perceiving function in how we see the world will be broader and wider, and we'll see a whole lot more than what we usually could. And it's the same with our evaluation. If we start to look at the world from a broader lens and our thinking is broader, our evaluation will be deeper and much more informed. So that when we come to draw the conclusions from our evaluation, we can start to ask ourselves, do I need to make some fine tuning to my business? Or do I need to redesign my business altogether? And when we make those decisions and can make the conclusions about redesign and design, we need to then ask ourselves, how do we upgrade the capability of our business to be able to deliver the new design and or redesign? And again, the upgrade here is not just on the business itself, but it's on us, the decision makers that are running the business. So that we are very mindful of the need to consider who we are as decision makers. We need to be aware as an adaptive leader that upgrading not only means the business itself, but who we are as decision makers. And then finally, taking what we've learned and what we've designed, implementing and testing and putting those tests out there, as Marvin's already indicated, as minimal viable products in how we're changing our business, our products, our supply chains. It's about trying things out with the customer and working with the customer and clients to refine our products or our offerings and our value to make sure that what we have in mind is going to be useful and effective to the customer and that we are providing value out there. And it's quick turnaround. This is not a long drawn out process because the environment is rapidly changing. In a turbulent transitional economy, anyone who tries to take a more perfectionist approach that takes long periods of time to develop a product or a value offering and then put it on the market finally after you believe it's all ready will not last in a transition economy. So there's a great deal of challenge here on people in business to review their self-concept, their self-image, their sense of identity of who they are in how they are going to be adaptive, relevant, and viable.
So let's get into these phases, and we've got, as I said, a playbook of key focus questions, and it will get you to start reflecting upon these now, as well as give you them as a PDF to download as well that you can then take back to your own management team if you have one, and if not, it'll give you some questions to keep reflecting on after this webinar. So first is the perceiving phase, and as Gary has mentioned, the first step is really being able to perceive your business environment, and therefore the changes in your business environment, and therefore the impacts on your business in very insightful ways. You know, two business owners could be looking at the same business environment, and one will see things that will make all the difference in the world to how they think their business needs to operate differently, and someone else will not perceive those distinctions and think it's pretty much business as usual, then wonder why they are struggling in a new transition economy. So here's your first question. We've already asked this one, but it's listed here just for completeness. It's something that if you do have a management team back at work and they're not on this webinar, you do want to ask them this question, because there are assumptions being made. When you say it's the new normal, what is the new normal? Is it mostly on the business as usual side, the BAU side? Is it going to be mostly the same? Is it going to be very different? Or is it just totally, completely different? And explore this with whoever you work with or as part of running your business as to what your assumptions are and why. Why do you think that? And we're going to explore that now. So one of the key things is, how is supply and demand changing? How is it shifting in this transition economy specific to your business? So looking at some of the participants that have signed up for this particular webinar, if you are selling bakery things, if you are selling, I saw someone there that is selling dumplings over in New Zealand. Hey, hello. If you are selling primary things, whether it's raw flour or whether you're selling packaged goods, your specific business, from your customer's perspective, is supply and demand changing? Because there will always be market demands. You know, some people are saying, "What do I do with my business? Because my business has dried up." Well, yeah, maybe the business has dried up, but not demand for value. There's always demand for value for something. People will need to buy something at some point. But what is it that they want to buy at this point in time in a transition economy? And therefore, supply also changes. If supply goes up and down, classic supply and demand. If it's something in demand and supply goes down, well, you know, it's a different market than if supply gets flooded again. So how is it changing? Is it changing at all? And if it is, how is it changing? So, Gary, any thoughts that you can tailor for people around this particular question?
I think there's it's a very strong point in that people do believe that, oh, my business has stopped, people stop coming in the door, and they say, and I've met a number of people saying, it's the end of the world, it's the end of my business. But as you rightly say, it's not. And it's a matter of shifting your perspective and becoming very customer centric, putting yourself in the shoes of the customer and saying, what do they need now given this kind of environment? And that's the key question to ask. And to be able to take yourself outside of the day-to-day business operations that you're used to and put yourself in the shoes of the customer and seeing what the needs are. And it may mean understanding bigger forces, such as how society is responding to being locked down, how society is responding to more cooking at home, for example. How is society responding to not being able to go to a restaurant and eat out, for example, or exercising? Each of these restrictions lead to new demands and potential markets that are available for people in business to start to take on. So it's about becoming what they call in marketing terms, customer intimate.
Yeah, it's so essential to understand that. So let's say you are your major customer are the supermarkets. And if that's the case, what's changing in their what constitutes value for them. Do they want more of something, less of something? Do they want different things as their customers are changing? If we're starting to find, well, terrific, lots of people now because of lockdown are learning, they've learned how to actually cook. Well, how about that? Well, okay, they're not necessarily going to be master chefs in 2 months. However, they might now want more demand on things that are semi-packaged up meals where they can add the finishing touches themselves and feel like they've been a master chef in their kitchen for a little bit. Don't know. You have to think for yourself in terms of how is it that supply and demand is changing for your specific business, and then therefore what constitutes value in this transition economy? How is value changing? Now, some ways to think about this, so to find your thoughts on this, Gary and I having worked with many leadership teams in very different types of organizations, sometimes it's easier for people to start thinking about these things when they've got some trigger words or trigger sentences. And so in this case, it would be great if you can kind of get into the chat function again and just jot down, give us a couple of words, a word or two here and there in terms of what you think constitutes value in this transition economy. So let me give you an example. In a stable economy, it could very well be that maybe your customers really valued, what constituted value for them was reliability and consistency of outputs from you, that your supply was constant and regular and reliable, and they could pretty much bank on it every time. But in a transition economy, when their needs are volatile, let's say they're the supermarket and customers come in and they panic buy or binge buy on various things, maybe what's more important to them now is not so much reliable, consistent supply, but actually flexibility in supply. Maybe what they really want is not stability. They want flexibility. They want you to be able to shift up and down how much they get, how little they get, or maybe a different supply. So maybe they want adaptiveness from you. That's more critical. And so if you can think of single word things, it might be things like speed. Maybe they want, I don't know, depending on the nature of your business, they might want things faster, or maybe they want things slower, or they might want things larger. I need bigger packages of things, or they want things smaller. Now that people are more at home and in a transition economy, they might not want to stock up on something. Instead, they want to buy it more frequently, and they want it in smaller packages. Years ago, when I did work with the canning industry, they started to realize that the size of the things that they put in cans made a difference to people's eating habits, that it was actually became about portion control at that point. And in certain industries, smaller sized packaging was more important because people saw that as a way to actually eat more properly. So again, what constitutes value in this transition economy? If you can think of a word or two, send it through the chat and tell us what you get. So.
And while you're sending it through to chat, could I request that all participants change your settings to allow everyone else to see your responses, so everyone else has a chance to read the material apart from Marvin and myself. I notice a lot have got that, but some have still got it to just to the, you've got to all panelists, but let's change, if you can change it to, change your function to everyone, that would be really great, so everyone can see your responses. At the moment, Marvin, what we're seeing, some words that are coming through are responsiveness and flexibility.
Yes.
Health.
Health.
Yes. There's another point from Ian who says, can you use it to identify where value wasn't being added in your supply chain?
Brilliant. Yes. Brilliant, Ian.
Very good. The best product, agility, best quality / special.
Special, yes.
Yeah. Values, a lot of value is still the same according to Peter, but he's also saying add contact free to the safety component.
Oh, nice. Yes.
And increase value for money as customers are being more thrifty. So more health, facilitator, open.
Oh, lovely. Yes.
And Mike talks about consumers wanting trust, transparency, relevance of messaging, short-term, less shopping expeditions will change buyer behavior.
Yes. Yes.
Greater information, delight, remote arrangement working products.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
That's a biggie.
Yes.
The story, connectivity, reassurance through reliability in quality and delivery. Provenance, which is going to be a big one as well, and responsiveness.
Excellent. The spot on. These are all fantastic. Now, as you'll start to see, this will impact considerably when we get to the evaluating and designing stages, because you have to take that into account as a lens from which you really honestly critique your business and say, is our value proposition fit for the current environment? So hold on to those thoughts as we continue on, because now we're starting to look at how does any changes in your particular industry impact what constitutes a successful business. So even just based on the values that you've just listed or you've just submitted in the chat forum, if there's changes in your industry that says, well, terrific, I now need more, I'm a giant supermarket chain and you're one of my suppliers, and what I now want is flexibility, adaptiveness. I need you to be able to handle volatility when it goes up and down. I need you to be able to work with me on that. Well, then what should a successful business look like in your particular area? Is it one that is geared up with heavy machinery and heavy production lines that can do consistent results? Or is it one where, no, we've actually got smaller lines where we can scale up, scale down very quickly. We can completely change the production process if we need to be able to fit certain kinds of changes and needs. What constitutes a real successful business in this way?
Marvin, a question that's come through I thought might be worth addressing here as part of the perceiving is from Maria, and she says, I have an online business. How do we suggest that she gets insights into her questions about perceiving without direct contact on a daily basis?
Yes. Okay. So there is a beautiful example, and it helps that you actually have an online business.
Yes, it does.
It's actually a lot easier. I don't know if you're familiar, Gary and I will try and give you as many different types of resources and reference you can link to throughout the webinar based on the questions you ask. There is a gentleman, for instance, around, and he's kind of well recognized in the online space. His name is Ryan Levesque. And Ryan Levesque has a method, you can just Google this, called the Ask method. And it's a very clever way of actually running surveys of every time someone interacts with you, just giving them a couple of questions very quickly to respond back. And what it is, it's a modern way of looking at database management. It's actually taking a look at segmenting your customers in particular ways based on their responses to your questions. And they are basically telling you what they're looking for on an ongoing basis. And you can notice the kinds of things that they buy, don't buy, and you can categorize accordingly. But at the same time, you can actually continually ask. Every purchase can also have a question attached to it. Every inquiry can have a question attached to it. And every question you ask on an ongoing basis just gives you more and more information to understand what your clients or what your customers are wanting at this point in time and how those wants are changing. Not only changing because of the business landscape is changing, but because they're changing in their maturity with how they interact with your business. Someone who's new to you as a client or a customer wants different things than someone who's been working with you or buying from you for the last couple of years. And so their customer journey, their customer maturity is changing, and therefore their wants and needs are changing. And unless you actually have an interactive platform working with them, fielding questions, etc., then yeah, you're basically all you're doing is hanging out a shingle and hoping people buy. But the more, as Gary has mentioned, more customer intimate you are, the more the trust is built up, and the more the stickiness factor comes into play, where it's just too hard to shift to another supplier because you know them so well, and it took a while to build up that kind of a relationship. Right. Great question. Let's move on because we got still a lot to cover. So this is such a big one. So Gary, over to you, because as a systems mapper and strategist, about helping people understand what they should be looking for in their landscape, in their business landscape.
That's 90 minutes just in that one, Marvin. What you should be paying attention to? Well, as we've mentioned already, I think the customers need to be paid attention to, but I think also social commentators that start to give you insights into different ways in how society is being shaped. There's also the political lens, and while politicians strut their stuff from their own ideology and a lot of the material is guarded, there's still insights if you start to look at the patterns that people are saying across different political spheres, both at a national and international level. So paying attention to what people are saying, at a political level will also help to give you a sense of what's going on out there. I think also some of the conversations between journalists to give you a different insight again. So it's this multiple perspective that you need. It's not just one perspective that you need to pay attention to that will help you understand what you need to pay attention to in the business landscape. Clearly, the economic factors and some of the driving forces that are shaping the economy, the financial markets, in how that's going to be shaped. That's an area of great uncertainty. And I think, again, rather than the specific comments that people make, it's about standing back and seeing the patterns that emerge from what they are saying. So person A might say up, person B might say down, person C might say up. And after a while, we get this sense, possibly, of what we may need to pay attention to based on a series of what people are saying. Remember, the environment, the business landscape is constantly changing. It's adapting and responding to how different people respond to other people's responses. So it's a highly interactive kind of landscape. And so there's nothing specifically that one could put their finger on and say, well, this is the direction it's going to take. And so looking at patterns across the landscape is going to be a critical business skill as an adaptive leader. And it's the usual areas, as I've mentioned, political, economic, social, and even some of the technological issues and changes that are going to happen. Somebody mentioned in the chat there how the technological disruptors could radically change the business landscape. And already we're seeing in some of the meat production sector in the abattoirs, how technology will be very dominant in becoming a robotic industry as opposed to human involvement in that area, for example, and that how it will radically change the live export and the meat processing industry, just as one example. The regulatory area, we've already experienced that over the last 6 months in how government has changed behaviours of society, not only in Australia, but around the world. That will actually play out even further given the American-Chinese dynamic that's playing out on international trade and other international drivers where we're going to be seeing a greater degree of nationalism, protectionism, regionalism. A lot of countries are going to pull back, close their borders and start to develop manufacturing and processing in their own countries. They're not going to rely on globalization to feed their customer and consumer needs. And so this new world, I believe, of emerging regionalization and protectionism is going to be a major driver in shaping the economy and the transitional economy and the transitional business landscape. And I think these are the key areas that business that you need to pay attention to as you start to think about reinvigorating your business.
Yeah, you know, these points that Gary has just brought up, they're so significant. What happens in a stable economy is that the way people usually try and perceive their environment is with lag indicators. It happens after the fact. They usually don't start thinking about what they need to change until the impact hits them. Because it's a pretty stable economy, so you keep doing business as usual, keep calm, just keep business as usual. And when you change when you have to. But in a transition economy, if you do that, you're always going to be battered by the winds when that happens. If you can pay attention to the kinds of things that Gary has mentioned, and you can see it coming, you do lead indicators and you see things coming in advance, and you start paying attention to, is it starting to make ripples in my business landscape where it will come and actually affect us at some point? If you're ready for it, if you've already adopted new technologies, or you already adopted new processes, or you're ready for change, you're built for change, as we'll talk about a bit later, you've got such a competitive advantage. Your speed of responsiveness, your agility is just so much better. And people will be wondering, how is it you're always, the market leader and ahead of the game? And well, it's because you're perceiving better. You're actually seeing your world faster and better and more insightfully than others. But let's move it on. And as Gary's mentioned as well, the stories you're making about your business landscape. What's your narrative? How are you making sense of what's going on around you? How are others making sense of it? What stories do they have about what's going on, and etc.? And inherent between your stories and their stories and what the media is saying and what industry leaders are saying, there will be differences. There will be contradictions. There will be things that confirm each other, but don't just take them. Don't just adopt what people say, and don't just immediately contradict or deny either. Instead, look at the contradictions and say, wait a minute, how do I now make sense of that? How does my story account for the fact that people have different perspectives of the same thing? And simply by asking that question, you will emerge better insights as to what's going on. You'll perceive the world differently, because it's not about I agree, I disagree. It's about, how do I make sense? What story can I have that makes sense of these differences? What are some people missing? What are some people getting that other people don't get? What is it that some people are pointing to that, maybe they're not totally on stable ground, but what they're pointing to has implications. So let me think about that. And the more you think, the better your perceptions, the better your thinking, and the better eventually your decisions about how to reinvigorate your business.
And just a hint in how to do that, I ask you and encourage you to get a large sheet of paper and even a whiteboard if you've got one, and start to write in dot point form some of the different stories that you're hearing, and looking at them from afar and stand back and seeing what's connected, what's disconnected, what's contradictory, and start to draw some lines or colors that helps you get the insights out of the stories that you're hearing out in the business landscape. It's a good way to deal with complexity. And as Ian says in his chat comment just a moment ago, this is very much about asking why, this perceiving. It's a good point, Ian.
Yeah, excellent. Moving it on, as we go to the evaluation phase. Now, with evaluating, we are evaluating if you perceive and getting insights about your business landscape around you. Now we need to look at our business and say, great, what is our strategic fit? Is our business proposition, our value proposition, does it add value? Do we have a proper fit with our larger business ecosystem here? So we're going to give you several questions, about 4 of them all in a row here, simply because they're kind of all different sides of the same thing. Years back, I learned a very powerful hip pocket set of analysis in terms of any types of things undergoing change. And you want to ask yourself some basic things like, what do I need to stop doing because it's no longer relevant? What do I need to start doing that I haven't been doing yet, but I need to because of a new environment? What needs to change? And pretty much, what do I need to maintain? Like, this will stay the same and I need to keep this going. So what do I need to stop, start, change, and maintain? We translated those into these 4 kinds of questions for you in terms of looking at how to reinvigorate your business in terms of adaptiveness, relevance, viability. So what parts of your business in this transition economy will pretty much stay the same? You need to know that. You need some stable ground. Right? There might be some aspects where you say, well, terrific. While I might need to come up with different ways of packaging different, say, again, if we stay with the example of using flour, right? If I were to come up with different types of products around flour or different ways to package up different types of grades of flour, but at the end of the day, I can't do any of those repackaging if I don't produce the flour. So at the end of the day, look, that aspect needs to stay the same. So stabilize that for yourself. What parts of your business stay the same? What parts of the business do you kind of really have to consider, hey, maybe I have to stop doing this. They may no longer be fit for purpose. They take too long, or they're not adaptive enough. They're not responsive. We said in the previous part, some of the value propositions are changing, like responsiveness, flexibility. Maybe my processes or this way of thinking or this mode of manufacturing is too slow, or it's not flexible enough for what I do, or for how the marketplace is changing. It's no longer relevant. It's just just simply not viable anymore. Or which things, look, yeah, they're still pretty much there, but I need to alter it. I need to modify it. I need to change it. I need to upgrade it. I need to do something with it. And what are some things that it's up for grabs? You know, I'm not so sure about it, but it's worth talking about whether we should continue it, change it, stop it, whatever it might be. I need to talk to my management team, or I need to think about it a bit further, or whatever it might be. So these are sort of 4 aspects of the kind of a similar thing. So, Gary, your comments on these 4?
Yeah, thanks, Marvin. This is very much contextualized by the value that you see out in the marketplace. What value have you provided? Is that value still relevant? And if it is, what changes do you make in the context of relevancy, in terms of if it's still relevant? But if it's not relevant, then what's the new value proposition you need to come up with? And then look at these 4 questions as a means to help you move forward in designing the value you now need to produce that will meet customer needs.
And again, because this is so unique to your particular business, you know, we won't ask you to throw things into the chat form, because it actually asks you to actually think about your business in great detail. And we also appreciate some things are so unique to you that they may not be important to others, but also some things are intellectual property on your side as well. So we'll keep that confidential for you. But this is it. This next question, though, we do kind of want to maybe kind of probe it a little bit. It's very important to also evaluate your business in terms of what are you learning from others in your industry or other businesses that are maybe similar to yours, and how they are adapting their business, and how are they shifting their, not just what they're doing, but the way they're thinking about their business and how it works in this transition economy. What are you learning from them? And those last 2 words there, and not, may actually even be more important, which is, what are you seeing that others are not doing? And what are you learning from that? And there's 2 sides to that question. There's the positive and the negative. On the positive side, are you seeing people, like, for instance, let's say you've been scrambling about how do I change my business? How do I change my business? And you're noticing that, gee, there's a lot of other people that are out there that are not changing their business. You now need to ask yourself the question, is that smart or not smart? Are they seeing something where, okay, there's no need to scramble, and therefore they're not, and therefore there's no need for you to scramble? Or is it you're seeing them kind of head in the sand, and you're saying, wait a minute, it's a transition economy and they're not doing anything about it simply because they're not thinking about it, which means, okay, there's something there to learn as well. And here's the test. Are you seeing them struggle more and become more fearful? Or are you seeing them starting to get excited about new opportunities? And if you're seeing them starting to get excited about new opportunities, it means they're thinking about something differently. What are they doing different, and what are they not doing? And then they may not be continuing the same model, as an example. If you're seeing them getting more fearful, getting more anxious, and struggling a bit harder, then what are they not doing? What are they not changing that they should be changing? And so start paying attention to what's going around and take a look at, what can I learn from what others are doing? And then how does that make me think about how I look at my business? So any thoughts you have on that? So kind of, so we'll throw some couple ideas out there. What are some of the things you're seeing that you think, hey, some people out there are doing this really well, maybe I should consider that? Or maybe you're seeing some people not doing something that you think, hey, maybe, you know, we need to avoid doing that as well. So maybe throw a couple of those ideas out there in the chat forum. Let's just see what comes up. And at the same time, while we're waiting for some of those, any other thoughts you've got, Gary?
No, but I'm seeing some comments come from people. There's some comments around lean business management.
Yes, thank you.
And there's the 5 whys process to do root cause analysis will help in understanding, perceiving, and evaluating. And there's quite a few comments here around lean business management in the food sector. And people are saying it's not all that common enough. But people tend to do it without knowing, and others really need to adopt it. Ian says there are similar businesses in the US are taking waste out and changing the distribution channels.
Yes.
So straight to end consumers and telling a great story.
Brilliant.
Mariana states it's easy to stop doing, but something hard to start doing and stop doing. So
True,
yeah,
true,
absolutely. And Maria says, I have seen and heard that the distribution model is being reviewed and trying to go to consumer direct might be a better option.
Absolutely.
And there's one client I'm working with at the moment who's exactly doing that. Rather than business to business, they're looking at internet and World Wide Web to go directly from business to consumer, and they're becoming a kind of coordinator between businesses and the consumer. So you take out a lot of middlemen.
Yeah. Brilliant. Those are great thoughts. And thank you for those people that suggested also things around lean, because we will be talking about lean methods coming up, and especially on step 5 over there. And in case anyone's not familiar with the 5 whys that were mentioned for root cause analysis, it comes back from quality management days. And it is a simple process, but very profound. We're just simply asked the question, why did that happen? Okay, why did that happen? Okay, so why did that happen? And you just ask questions 5 times to keep going farther and farther back until you find the root cause of something. Very powerful, simple, but very powerful technique. And as many of you have discussed as well, relooking at your distribution channels and your distribution networks is a change of business model. It completely changes the business model, far more adaptive, far more relevant value, far more viable, and just means completely, it starts with upgrading thinking before doing. So brilliant. All right, let's move it on to the designing and redesigning phase. So this is now, if we've taken a hard look at our business and said, do I need to upgrade, right? Do I need to actually do something? Well, how do I go about redesigning? So we want to give you some key things to first look at. So it doesn't mean throw everything, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some things to kind of evaluate very quickly about your business. Now, the one thing is, as we've spoken about in a transition economy, that it's a time where everything's shifting and changing. It'll probably be going that way for a while. And one of the ways that Gary and I like to think about this is the idea of a metaphor of a sailboat. Now, if you are building a sailboat, if you're going to design a boat, the boat here in this particular case is going to be the metaphor for your business. You're going to design a business, you're going to design a boat. You have to pay attention, as we have been in these last 2 phases, around your business landscape, your environment, your business ecosystem that you're doing your business in. If you're building a sailboat, you have to know that the conditions, the environment you're putting a sailboat in is going to be water. So if you're going to design a sailboat, it better float, right? It's also going to be out there in the seas where there's lots of currents and waves. So it's going to have to, and the boat will rock. So you better put a keel on there so that it doesn't tip over. You're going to be driven by, if it's a sailboat, you're going to be driven by wind. And the wind will change in both direction, not just both, but direction, intensity. It's going to be changed. It's going to have, sometimes it'll be there, sometimes it won't be there. Sometimes it'll be light, sometimes it'll be heavy winds. And so you want to design the sailboat so it's designed to sail, that it's flexible, that it's built for adaptiveness and flexibility. It's built so that we can have different types of sails. We can build so that the boom on the mast can swivel in the direction where the wind is going. We can, in mid-course, we can change the set of the sail. We can put up a bigger sail or smaller sail, depending upon how heavy or light the winds are. And the rudder is built to actually change so that we can actually change the movement of the boat. And basically, the boat is structurally designed to be adaptive and flexible because the environment we're in is flexible, adaptive, volatile. A lot of businesses don't do that. A lot of businesses says, I'm going to set up shop, I'm going to do this, and I'll amortize this over the next 20 years or 25 years or whatever it might be. And you're built for stability. You're not a sailboat, you're a pylon, right? And you're built to just withstand the weather changes. In this world, it's not about withstanding the changes in our transition economy. It's about using them to keep propelling us forward. So this is an important metaphor to start thinking about how can your business be built to sail in a transition economy. Gary, you want to expand upon this before we get into the...
Yes, just very quickly, that the type of sailboat you actually design will be based on your stories you have in your head about who you are, how you perceive yourself as a business leader, as an adaptive leader, and how you interpret the business landscape. If your perceptions about yourself and the landscape are fairly limited and narrow, then your boat is going to be, as Marvin's pointed out, fairly rigid. And your boat will not be a flexible, adaptive mechanism to move through the turbulence of the oceans. And so what's really critical here in this metaphor is not just the boat itself, but it's the person who designs, builds and sails the boat, and then changes the boat accordingly to as the conditions change. Because part of the metaphor, and as you'll see later in step 4 in upgrading, we need to upgrade the boat that we build. It's not going to be the same boat as time goes on. And that requires a whole nother skill set as an adaptive leader.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also your business logics, your business outcome as well. So it's a big difference designing a luxury sailboat for you to vacation on versus you're going to try and win the America's Cup. It's a racing yacht. That's a different kind of a design. So all of that also comes into play. But let's take a look at this in terms of looking at your boat or redesigning your business. So how much do you believe, again, this is something both reflecting on yourself as well as if you have a management team, to actually have some deep conversations with them about how much do you believe your business and the way you do the business, your operational models, need to change in this transition economy? And why do you actually think that? Do you think that it's, number one, it's pretty much BAU, we probably need to adjust some of our processes or account for the fact that we might have to have less people in our physical environment if it's of that type, because we need social distancing, but it's pretty much business as usual. Or it's number two, look, it's still our core business, but we need to tweak it, adjust it, modify it. It's one where, for instance, if you were a retail outlet, you might have to have a far more emphasis on online e-commerce, for instance. It's still your core business, but you will modify what you currently have to accommodate the new transition economy. Or is it number three? It's more than tweaking, adjusting, and modifying. It is, in lean language, we need to pivot. We actually need to go to business 2.0. We need a new version of our core business. It's still our core business, but it's a new version. A really good example of this is I have a colleague of mine, and she used to run a wellness center, a wellness shop, a retail outlet, as well. And so in the front part, you could buy things that having to do with your health, your wellness, everything from massage oils to different types of education books to all sorts of things. And in the back part of her premise was places where it's a wellness center. So you could have rooms where there was massage therapy. There was a whole range of other types of therapies involved, a little room in the back for running little educational seminars. And she had this running just before COVID-19 lockdowns. Once the lockdowns occurred, she obviously she already had an online aspect to her business, but then obviously it now had to become all online. And what she discovered in the 2 months we've been in lockdown is that she could actually do her entire business online. And so what happens now, she's at number 3, she's got business 2.0. She's actually closed down the actual physical premise. It's gone, right? There's no more part of her business model that's about physical premise. She still sells the stuff she was selling at retail online, but it's now an e-commerce store. And she still offers the types of massage services, etc. But she's now a booking agency. You book it through her, and then you go to wherever the masseuse is, and you go to their place, not hers. And so it's a completely different business model. It's 2.0. It's still her core business. It's still what she was doing previously, but in a whole new form. That's not modification. It's a whole new form. It is 2.0. Point 4, though, is, again, completely different again. It's where your whole business is, we've just shifted industry now. We're in a new business category. In my particular field, for instance, there used to be a group called Wilson Learning in the US, and they were pretty much trainers. They were consultants, and they were coaches. And they started to recognize that more and more people wanted to learn more of what they were doing. So they started publishing books, and they started publishing personality inventories and a range of that things. And they started to realize that was actually far more lucrative than running trainings and face-to-face consulting and face-to-face coaching. And they've now transitioned to a whole new category. They're no longer consultants, trainers, coaches. They are now a publishing company. Completely different category, completely different business. And so sometimes you might think, well, the operational model needs to change, as some of you have already been discussing. If you change your distribution networks and we go from B2B and we go to B2C, well, everything changes. The way you actually do your business completely changes. Or you can completely change your value offering itself. It's like what you actually sell is actually completely different. And I think you've got some examples on that as well, Gary.
Yes, there's the famous example of the banana grower in Queensland that was using their waste product and producing banana flour out of the waste product that has now worldwide fame. And not only that have they got a new offering from a flour, but also nutraceutical products, which are now coming onto the market as well. It's a wonderful example, even though this is prior to COVID-19, it's an example where people are looking at their businesses, reevaluating and redesigning because the market needs are there. The market is changing and they're changing accordingly, and can see new value offerings that they can provide out of the materials they already have.
Yeah, so powerful. So in the chat function, please just kind of jot down, what do you think your business at this point in time? You might have deeper conversations after the webinar, but for right now, what do you think for your particular business model? Are you pretty much number 1, number 2, number 3, or number 4?
All right. Lots of 3s and 4s.
Oh, right. You got some 4s. Excellent.
Yes, we have 3s, 4s, and some 2s.
Well. Yes, fair enough. Yep.
All right. And in terms of, lots of 2s, 4s. Yeah, 2s, 3s, and 4s.
Okay, excellent.
All right. And so we'll need to cover this in the next 20 minutes or so.
Okay, cool. All righty. And so therefore, how do you need to rethink? So this is a follow-on thing. Based on what you've just said. So how do you need to rethink, redesign how your business works in this particular context? So given that that's what you said, I'm going to do number 2, 3, or 4. Let's now redesign the business accordingly. Now, once you do that, however, that's kind of moving on. Once you do that, again, we can't tell you exactly how because it's unique to your business, and we'd have to have really intimate knowledge of your business to help you specifically with that. But for right now, that's the core question. How do you need to rethink, redesign? Number 4 is now an upgrading issue. So once you've redesigned, or you're starting to look at designing or redesigning your particular business, just like if you bought a new computer that had new capabilities, you're going to need to upgrade all your software programs. You're going to need to upgrade some of your skill sets. You're going to need to upgrade some new knowledge. There's a lot of new upgradings that you need to go into. But at the start of it all comes this one. So I know, Gary, you've got some very big views on this one.
So too. And as I've said, I think with the sailing concept, the type of boat that you're going to create and design is going to be based on your sense of self. It's going to be an image of you and how you see the world, and it's no different to your business. Upgrading your self-concept as a leader is going to be a critical part of the journey of reinvigorating business. It's a whole new world out there. It requires a whole new sets of belief systems about understanding that world, about understanding who you are and how you fit in that world, how you perceive the world, and hence how you redesign your business.
Yeah, if someone, for instance, says that I am a farmer, well, what does that mean? So does that mean your identity or your self-concept as a farmer is someone who does things the way that it's always been done? Or are you a farmer that's also a learner? And are you a farmer that's also a leader in your particular business? Are you a farmer that's also an innovator? And when these things come together, that's a different identity that comes into play. And then it will lead towards what new ways of thinking do you need to adopt? And again, just a little bit of learning. Let's read some books. Let's talk to other people. What are ways of thinking I need to upgrade between the ears? As they often say in the trade, that you can upgrade your hardware, and then you can upgrade your software, But for humans, we need to upgrade the wetware that's occurring between our ears. And so how do we upgrade our ways of thinking and our core assumptions about how business works? And therefore, what new knowledge and skills do we need to acquire? Do you need to have, it could be a new knowledge ranging from, or skill set ranging from just the ability to learn, for instance. One critical skill is the ability to let go of old beliefs and old paradigms that are no longer relevant. It might mean that you will need to learn new technology skill sets, as pretty well identified in large corporates, for instance. There is no question that employees today need to have technology skills to do remote work. And so if you're not au fait with technology to do remote work, then it's hard to work from home. So all these types of things will come into play. So.
And just at a point here, Marvin, I think it'd be useful to mention that if you're interested to upgrade your sense of identity or self-concept in being a more adaptive and effective leader, and to be able to move towards changing your ways of thinking and developing new knowledge and skills, FIAL is offering a leadership course that will be launched on the 1st of June. So for those of you that are interested, we have the next step for you to take in terms of your capability, enhancing your capability to reinvigorate your business.
Yeah, very, very powerful, because I also know in that course you focus a lot on the self-concept as well. So. And again, this is a very big one. It's not just you and your business. Now, now is the time for, if there's going to be inspiration and greatness, it's times like this in a transition economy. Are there opportunities for you to lead new thinking and new ways of doing business for your entire industry? Could you actually, some people really aspire to making a difference to this larger system. And in fact, you might touch upon quickly, Gary, on some of the things you found with your own behavioral modeling project with leaders who actually, when they collaborate, how they do it for the good of the larger industry or the larger system.
Yes, thanks, Marvin. That's exactly correct. In a neuro-behavioural modeling project that I'd been leading on collaboration and looking at the insights from that to assist the food and agribusiness sector to move forward into the future, what I found was that collaboration was, when people collaborated, they had a self-concept and self-image of being part of the bigger system. That people collaborated when they looked at the good of the whole. And when they focused on that, they certainly achieved a great deal of benefit for themselves. But the initial focus is not themselves. Their initial focus is the broader business landscape and the ecosystem of food and agribusiness. And that was a great surprise. And no matter what industry I looked into and whatever people I spoke with, it was the same story over and over again. It's looking at the bigger picture and working to improve the bigger picture that made all the difference.
Yeah, in many ways as well, it's also where the real innovations occur. It's through those collaborations. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Look, we'd love to actually get your thoughts as to what are some of these things on new ways of thinking, etc. But because of time, we do want to have time for at least for a little bit of a Q&A coming up. Let's quickly move to the testing side. And this is what Gary was referring to a bit earlier and what many of you have been saying around lean principles. And if you're not familiar with it, these are things that what we want to touch upon in this is, while we can't give you obviously a huge tutorial on lean methods or agile methods, that we do just want to highlight it to your attention if you're not aware of it already. That you can use modern startup thinking about how to actually do startups, what are called lean startups. So while we have lean comes from a manufacturing process, but it also got applied to the entrepreneurial world as well. So there's lean startup methods, also based on principles from IT called agile. And these are key principles that are so more suited to a transition economy, far more than a stable economy, that in a transition economy, you can thrive in a transition economy. I'm not talking about survive, I'm talking about thrive with these forms of thinking and principles and methods that are in play. The basic premise is saying that what you don't want to do is spend long amounts of time trying to plan, prepare, get it perfect, and then launch, only to find out that sometimes you just spent a lot of money and a lot of time creating something nobody wants. It's actually irrelevant. It's actually adds no value. there are actually other ways to rapidly create product offerings, what are known as minimum viable products, meaning they're viable, they sell, people will buy them because they do work, but it's the minimum set you need. You don't have to have all the bells and whistles. People are happy to buy this form that you're offering at this point in time because A, it's customer based. It was based on what they wanted in the first place. It's based on relevance right away. And as soon as they buy it, you have a relationship with them where they give you feedback. You're getting, you're someone asking around, how do I stay in touch with my customers? You're doing things like an ask method and things of that nature, where you're constantly getting feedback, and you're going for very short, what are called iterations, short cycles of improvement that are called sprints in the agile methodology. And roughly in a sprint for IT, it's like every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, you're improving something. And in every 2 week time cycle, or time box, as they call it, your product offerings are just getting better and better and better with each feedback loop. And your customers are paying for this, by the way. They're buying this. You know, it's not a pilot. It's actual an offer, right? And you might think, well, who would do this? Well, you already do this if you work with software. If you've bought software, if you're using any of the Microsoft Office software, if you're using any of the Google software, if you're using, you've already done this. You're already using software. They're giving you feedback. Everything sometimes, if it freezes, a feedback thing gets sent, and they're constantly upgrading. And you notice you're going to get an upgrade on your software every so often. That's going to say version 2 point something is now available. Well, they didn't just sit in a back room and do that. They're getting feedback from people. They're finding out what the things are, what software is working, not working. Then they upgrade you. So you keep paying the subscription or whatever it might be, but you're paying for it every step of the way anyway. It's a way of thinking about your business proposition. If you're doing manufacturing, you might think, oh, it's going to take me 3 years to retool. Probably not. Maybe all up, yes, but you could probably get some stuff happening within a month or two that gets stuff going, and then start improving from there while you stay in business. This is critical for your viability side. So you shorten your time cycles. Basically, the idea is get something out that adds value that customers have said, get feedback, and then be fast to respond. Improve it right away, always stay relevant, and at the same time, your customers are still purchasing from you, and it's a way to actually stay viable in all of this. Again, we can spend the next several hours talking about lean startup methods, but we won't and we can't, so we'll need to move on. So Gary, before we kind of move it on, any thoughts?
No, not at this stage, but I think we'll move on. Okay.
So in summary, basically, here's what we want to say, and then we'll get to a Q&A for you. Basically, what this webinar is about is this. Recognize that we are all in a transition economy. This is about adaptive challenges for businesses. And as a result, we need adaptive leadership. We need adaptive responses to actually now occur. As a business leader, you need to think, how do I adapt? You need to do things when you look at your business, evaluate it in terms of adaptiveness, relevance, and viability. Make sure your business is adaptive. Make sure you're continuing to add value in a transition economy by staying connected with your customers. And use minimum viable products. Use lean startup methods to actually get viability in your business. Offer things, short feedback loops, improve as you go. The way you do that is work through that 5-step process we've given you. Perceiving, evaluating, redesign, upgrade, test. Perceive your environment with insight. Given what you know about your environment, take a look at your business, evaluate it, design or redesign it as needed. Upgrade your skill sets as needed, and start putting out stuff. Test whether or not your products work. Test whether or not your value proposition is relevant. Get feedback, keep upgrading, keep testing. Every new offer is another experiment to find out how you can add more value that's out there as their conditions change. And then finally, use these questions that we've been giving you. Again, we'll send you a PDF. FIAL will be sending you a PDF that you can use that has all these questions you can take back with you to your particular group or reflect on it further for yourself. So before we go into any Q&A, Gary, any other summaries or aspects of the takeaways?
I think not. No. I think there was a question earlier on, but I think people are very much agreeing. There's one point from one panelist is talking about from Oysters, Tasmania, about restaurants reopening with limited menus, which is an example of this minimal viable product. They're changing their protocols, which is a great example.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yes.
And Mike is saying that even in FIAL, FIAL's got a program called Fast and Furious Innovation Program, which very much takes in these concepts of lean thinking and lean approaches.
Magnificent.
So I think there's lots of agreement there, Marvin,
Awesome.
in what we're talking about.
Good. So are there, in the few minutes we've got left, any questions? Please send them in the chat forum. Gary, we might actually have something in the Q&A thing as well, if you might take a look.
I think that's just one number.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yep.
So if anyone's got any questions or things that we might be able to cover in the last few minutes that we have, send them through the chat room and we'll see what we can do.
I think it's quiet there, Marvin.
we've either stunned them or they've all left or... Fantastic.
Oh, there is two new messages.
Oh, excellent.
Can we talk about who adapts more easily?
Yes. Again, if you could maybe add in a couple of things just to specify a bit more of what you mean, but I'll start with some general thoughts. There is no question that some businesses, based on the way they're geared up, can respond more easily and rapidly than others. There's just no question. Obviously, the larger you are, and the more you have some pretty intricate processes and say manufacturing processes or things of that nature, it's harder to just turn around and make things change. The smaller you are, usually it's more nimble. And this is often why you'll see in small business statistics that, or even in the startup spaces, the majority of innovations, of business innovations, by far, the majority of business innovations come from small business. Because they're just faster, they're speedier, they don't have long decision protocols, they just get on with it and try and get a result. So the more you're not locked down or committed or heavily invested in machinery and processes that have to work in a particular way, the faster you can actually respond and things of that nature. There's also some industries, as we pointed out, that the pressures aren't going to be much where you have to change greatly. If you're in construction, it's going to be pretty much the same. If you're a hairdresser, it's going to be pretty much the same. If you're a supermarket, in some ways, your front end is kind of the same, up to a point. So there's certain things where it doesn't need to respond that quickly. But if you do need to respond, you have to think nimble. But you also don't have to think whole of business. If you're somewhat larger, if you're large, medium-sized business, for instance, or even a large business, you can think of pockets, aspects of your business that can respond quicker. And there's ways to do it. There's things around living systems that actually show you how businesses can respond quickly. For instance, Apple was a great example when they created the Macintosh. They realized that at the time their core business was selling a computer called the Lisa. And what Stephen Jobs did to create the Macintosh is he had to actually get away from core business because core business would stifle him. Core business was not going to let innovation occur. It was about core business, what they already had. So they created the Macintosh division. It was a separate building, had a completely different culture. These people, and they identified their identity was one of around pirates of the industry. Every morning they would have a flagpole and they would raise the flag of the Jolly Roger, the old pirates' skull and crossbones, because they always thought they were the pirates of the industry, and they were separate away from the business. And then therefore they were able to innovate and create things like the Macintosh. Stephen Jobs, decades later, replicated that very same strategy when they launched the iPod. And do you know that from the time they went, not the iPod, the iPhone, when they went from concept to launch, it was roughly, to pilot launch, it was roughly about 9 months. And it was a similar thing where he isolated them off away from core business to actually work on it. And again, so what it is, sometimes if you're somewhat larger business, if you want speed of response, sometimes it means you might need to do it as a special project rather than as trying to completely change the core business to start. And it might be faster that way. So, Gary, did you get any more on that?
Oh, yeah, there's quite a few more now. But very quickly, there's a couple of themes around collaboration and how do we get collaboration going? how to inspire leaders of industries to actually start implementing some adaptive business leadership rather than reactive responses. There's a question.
Over to you on that one. Do that one. That's important. That's an important one.
Yeah, I think what I've learned from my neuro-behavioural modelling project on collaboration is the way to move forward, and this is still work in progress, so it's still early days. But what I'm seeing is the approach to collaboration is to start to support people who already collaborate and working with them in a leadership role to set up the conditions that will entice people who don't usually collaborate to start collaborating. And that sounds sort of obvious, and also somewhat counterintuitive at the same time, because you would think you would start working with people who haven't collaborated and encourage them to do so. But it turns out that that's not the greatest leverage point. The greatest leverage point is to actually work with the people who are collaborating and set up the environmental conditions to bring others on board. And I think if we to give a very public version of that, that's what FIAL does. It's been working very hard to collaborate with many others and setting up the business environment to allow others to start and participate in the collaborative process. Can everyone be a leader? And I think anyone can be a leader, but it's whether you want to be a leader or not. And it does require shifts in some of the internal skills you have and your willingness to go on that journey. And as I've said, there is a course we're going to launch very early in June, and for people to look at the website or call up FIAL, you get some more information about how to go on a journey about leadership and finding ways to inspire leaders to be more adaptive than reactive and technical. There's one question I thought we just might float, Marvin, before we finish. Mm-hmm. It's from the oysters industry, and oysters have been in a position of undersupply, but now it's flipped. Our lead times are long and cash flow is needed. So as an industry, we are chasing a price spiral down. Have we got an example of how we can draw people together in such an industry in this times?
I don't know of a specific example per se, but it's a brilliant question. What my first instinct on this, and you might highlight this a bit more, Gary, is it would be fabulous to be able to do a systems map of the dynamics around there and find where the leverage is for the economics in the model. Yeah. It sounds like there's a built-in constraint to how the viability of that business works. There's something about the economic modeling of it in relation to how it actually works in dynamics that makes it difficult in this case. And there would have to be a leverage loop in there somewhere. Yeah,
I agree. And I think, as Mariana's just pointing out, this is a great example of a burning platform where I think it will bring people together. And I think we need some coordination to bring the people from the industry together, and we work on it together through a collaborative approach.
Absolutely.
And that's what FIAL is all about.
Absolutely. And since we are at that time.
Thank you to Mariana.
Thank you, Mariana. And thank you for everyone. So we are out of time at this time. We would love to be able to answer your questions more if we had another 2 months to answer your questions. But we tried to jam pack as much as we could into this hour and a half. And again, it's a very, very big topic. We did want to give you a playbook to actually start with. We'll send it to FIAL, and FIAL can send it out to everyone else in terms of the PDF that has the questions, so you can take it back to your businesses as well, plus have it personally for some reflection as well. So before I hand it back to you, to Gary, to close off, I just want to say thank you, and thank you so much for letting us be part of your afternoon and your day. And we do hope we added some value for you. We hope we stayed relevant for you, and that we can help you at least start thinking about how to approach reinvigorating your business. So, Gary.
Thank you, Marvin. As usual, it's an honor and a pleasure working with you in designing this webinar. I want to thank Mariana Prika from FIAL for commissioning this webinar. Great insights, Mariana, and as a great example of understanding the needs of your clients and your customers in the industry for us to be able to develop such a webinar.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you again sometime soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.